So today I will talk about how we can start building microservices with Rust. I will take that. Okay. So microservices is a new way of designing application in the cloud. And while I was using Rust for some pet projects, I was wondering if it would be a good fit to build microservices. So I tried to see if we have the basic building blocks to make this possible. So we will see what we have available for us. So this presentation is split in two main parts. The first one will be a quick refresher on what is the microservice architecture, and we will try to get to list the basic needs we have to start, and then we will move to a more coding related part about Rust, and I will show you how to start using those blocks. So let's start with this microservice architecture. So in a nutshell, this architecture dictates that instead of having one giant code base for one application in which every developer in the team will work on maybe almost all aspects of the software, we will split this software into many submodules, many independent processes, which will be managed by independent agile teams, and those modules will be decoupled from each other and will just share their API together. So why moving to a microservice? First, because successful applications have a bad habit of growing huge and huge over time. So the application is successful, we start hiring new engineers, young and more experimented engineers. We have time pressure to release new features. And sprint after sprint, we add more and more code, sometimes not in the best ways we can do it. And with time, the code will become a monstrous monolith on which development can become a pain, the maintenance will become a pain, debugging and refactoring and building will become a pain. And one of the most important to me will be onboarding. So when I mean onboarding, I mean bringing new developer into the team, onto the product, onto the project, training them to get the knowledge and start working on it. So if you cannot, if the code is becoming so complex that you cannot train those newcomers to know everything on it, or to understand at least the code in its globality, they won't be able to work efficiently on this code. And if there is no one who can understand the code in its globality, design decision will probably won't be made the way they should be. And this will, with the time, lead to what we call the big ball of mud. So this big ball of mud is an anti-pattern we all know. And I guess most of you already have seen what it looks like. So first, we split the software into many modules. So this will change the way we work. So I take this picture of the Airbus A320. So this plane is built into different parts by different teams across the globe. And so those teams, in the design there is obviously some contracts and some interfaces they have to respect, so that when all those parts are brought together to be assembled together, they will fit. So we split the work, we split the responsibilities. We try to keep simple part because simpler is better. And assembling all those parts, so for a software, will be handled by DevOps. So when I say DevOps, I don't mean DevOps team or DevOps people. I mean DevOps methodology. Whoever will do it. So I mean that we will automate deployment. We will define what part goes with which part and how they are connected together. So, well, imagine if this plane was made like a monolithic application, and everyone is working on everything in the single factory. And the guy who, I don't know, the guy who is responsible from building the horizontal stabilizer is also responsible from building the hydraulic system for the autopilot. And also doing the, I don't know, the multimedia system. Well, I'm not sure it would work, and probably I would come to Poland by train instead of plane. Okay, so what does it mean in a software? So in the microservice architecture, we split, as I said, the software into separate processes, which talk together across the network. We keep them simple with distinct functionalities. They are highly decoupled from each other, so this is important so that we can one day swap one service by another without modifying the code of surrounding services. Those services should be stateless and share nothing, so that we can make them scalable and fault tolerant. So this model has been already adopted by many big players in the IT industry, like Amazon, Google, Netflix, Uber, and there are many more who did that. So some of you may think, well, okay, we already split the work in our software. We already have modules. We already have packages. We already use libraries. Well, when you do a monolithic architecture, I don't say that this is bad. And in fact, sometimes it's better to keep with a monolith because it will be easier to deploy, easier to understand, while it stays small. And the microservice architecture is especially a good solution when you want to use what the cloud has to offer to you, while when you want to scale, to automatically deploy new resources, when you want to move instances from one server to another one. Some software don't need that, so well. Okay, so this architecture is not a silver bullet. It will solve some of your problems, but it will bring other problems, mostly regarding the deployment part. Because of course, when you want to deploy one monolithic software, well, you put all this into one package like a TGZ, and you upload it to a server, then you unpack it, you run a few scripts, you edit a few configuration files, and that's all. With microservice, you will have to be able to deploy multiple kind of processes across the network on multiple servers. You will have to configure everything so that they know where are the other services they have to discuss with. And obviously this deployment model will also be dynamic, meaning that some of your instances can get killed at one time, can be moved. So when I say moved, I don't mean that it will be really moved, but it will be just deleted in one place and created in another one. And well, if you want this to work, you have to have a strict discipline in the way you design your application. Oh, sorry. So you have your microservices, this big pile of Lego bricks, and well, okay, that's all. You want to make them work together, and you want to build something with it, like this indestructible space warship. If you want to do that, you need to have contracts, interfaces, and best practices. So I like this metaphor of with the Lego bricks, because one Lego brick is just a small thing which alone is not really useful. You can just look at it and that's all. But it is designed in a way that it can be plugged in many kind of different manner with different kind of Lego bricks, so that you can start building incredible things with it. And only the imagination is the limit. So, well, our microservices is not very different from this Lego brick. Maybe instead, just, well, you cannot walk barefoot on the microservice and hurt yourself, but, well. Okay, so let's talk about those best practices. We have, when you do object-oriented programming, you know the best practices. There are design patterns you can follow. It's well known, but when we talk about this microservices architecture, it's harder to find best practices. But there is one set of rules written by Heroku platform. You may know this one, which dictates a few set of rules, so 12 rules, to build up applications, software as a service application, which use declarative format in order to set up automation. So declarative format is this set of file in which you will say how to deploy your application, like Ansible script or Chef script, for example. This application will have clean contract with the operating system for maximum portability. So your application will be able to run on many kind of different systems, like maybe CentOS, Debian, Ubuntu, maybe Linux, or maybe Windows or macOS. This application will be suitable for deploying on cloud platforms, on modern cloud platforms, and it will minimize divergence between development environment and production environment, while enabling continuous deployment. And this application will also be designed in a way that it will be easy to scale. So let's see what we have in those rules. We have one about the code base, one about dependencies, configuration, how to treat backing services, how to separate build, release, run workflow, how to make your application stateless, how to expose those services, how to manage concurrency, disposability. That the rules say that we have to keep development and production environment as the more similar as possible. It dictates a few rules about how to treat logs and admin processes. So we don't have time today to talk about all those rules. So I will have to remove half of them. So just I will give you a few words on those rules. So this one on backing services states that we should treat any kind of backing services like an attached resources. So this means that, in fact, we can, in an application which do that, we can swap a resources by another one. So if we use one day one MySQL database, we can one day say, okay, I won't use this one, now I will use the one provided by Amazon. And you just have to change some URL in the configuration without changing anything in the code. The build, release, run rule says that, well, we have to separate strictly the three phases, the three stages in the workflow about building the product, or compiling it, transforming the source code into something you can run. The release stage, where you will bring configuration specific to an environment, and the run stage, where you run the stage. This means that you cannot come into a running application and change something on it. Once it's running, you cannot change it. It's completely immutable. Concurrency is about scalability. It says, if you want to scale, just start a new process, and you can have multiple kind of processes, one for serving requests, one for processing some kind of jobs in backend. Disposability says that your application should be disposable, so it can be stopped at any time, gracefully or not. So if it's a graceful stop, it should handle clean shutdown stuff, like, for example, say, okay, no, I won't accept any new request, but I will complete those I already started. But if it's not a clean shutdown, well, you will also have to be able to maybe manage some retry, meaning that well, your application, your microservice was doing something, and if it stops, another instance should be able to take the job where it stopped, or to start it again. DevProd parity is about keeping development and production as similar as possible. So, for example, if you use in production a PostgreSQL database, try to avoid using SQLite on your development environment. This is because most of the bugs can be found in the development environment, and if you don't use the same environment than the one used in production, well, some bugs are likely to be specific to the production environment, and you won't be able to find them during the development phase. And the last one, admin processes, is about starting one-shot processes when you want to perform some admin tasks. So you have your microservices running, you want to do something maybe on the database, like, I don't know, removing all the all the users who have expired. You just start one process which will do that, and then it will shut off by itself, and you're done. Okay, so that's all for those few rules. I won't talk about more. Now let's see what we have remaining. We have a few basic rules here. So I will start with those rules and see what we can do in Rust to follow those rules. And then we will move to those two rules in the middle, which are a bit more, there is a bit more to say about this. I will explain this in a few slides. Okay, so now let's dive into the code. So we will try to, we won't try, we will see how we can use the basic building blocks available in the Rust ecosystem to start building a microservice which store data into database and expose them on the network. So before we start, just a few words on the Rust language. So I don't know if some of you went to Alex Christian's presentation yesterday or plan to go to the other one at the end of this day. So I will just introduce the language again. So the Rust language is a statically typed language, very strongly typed language, which is compiled into a bare metal CPU instructions. So there is no bytecode. It's not like a JVM or anything else like that. It's quite a performant language with no garbage collector. The memory is, well, almost automatically managed, but not by a garbage collector. It's It's done with at compile time and with the scope. And this language has a very powerful compiler which will perform many checks for you at compile time to avoid many errors and many misuse of memories and threads and so on. So there is a small list of few features that this language will provide you. So this list is from the Rust official website. So this is obviously some marketing stuff, but I think it's quite true. Okay, so why not using Rust for building microservice? First of all, because the language is quite hard to learn. It brings many new concepts. The compiler is always yelling at you that what you are doing is wrong, at the beginning at least. And the learning curve is quite steep. So, well, if you want to start being productive in Rust, you will have to practice a lot, and at the beginning it's hard. Also, the ecosystem, is still a bit immature. So you probably won't find the libraries for everything you want to do. It's not like in Python or Ruby or Java where almost everything is already existing. And some of the libraries which already exist are not stable yet, or well, cannot use that in production. Also, the asynchronous style exists, but it's still maturing, and well, things are likely to change in a short future. But okay, there is also reasons to use it. First, the performance and the low memory footprint. So as I said, Rust is compiled, so it has no garbage collector, it has a minimal runtime, and this leads to a small memory footprint. So if you compare to something like Java, if you build a microservice in Java, well, your service will need a few more time to start up, and it will hit much more memory into your containers or into your virtual machine. So when we deploy into platforms as a service like Heroku or Google App Engine or Amazon, you are likely to pay for what you use, and sometimes using more performant or more performant languages or software is a good point. Also, in Rust, there is thread safety. So Rust is able to tell you when you are doing something wrong with shared resources between your threads. So it can know what can be shared, what cannot be shared, and the compilation will fail if you are misdoing something with that. So those two first are not really specific to microservice, but it's a good reason to use Rust. The third point is about packaging and distributing your software. So when you compile your Rust application or your Rust microservices, everything is statically linked into one single binary. So you don't have to package many libraries or shared libraries with it. Everything is in one single executable binary. The language is expressive and productive, or at least when you get used to it. And well, the code is quite portable too. So when you build for Linux, you can also build for Windows and macOS if you want. For some part, you will need to adapt the code, but most of the code will be able to compile on all those platforms. Okay, so let's study a simple case. So if we go back to this schema I showed at the beginning, we will focus on one microservice. So keep the thing simple, and we will focus also on those two parts of it. So interface with the database and interface with the REST interface. Sorry. So let's see what we have in Rust for that. But before all, well, we want to have a development environment, and well, there is already everything needed in that. So we have RustUp to install the Rust compiler. So RustUp is a tool which helps you to manage different environments. You can install latest stable release of Rust. If you want to switch to beta or nightly, you can do it. If you want to switch to another target architecture, you can do it. So if you want to do some cross-compilation, it will download everything for you and install and manage the links between the environments. So this tool will bring to you rustc, which is the compiler, and Cargo, which is the package management tool from Rust. So Cargo is a bit like NPM for Node.js or PIP for Python or Maven for Java. It's the tool which handles all your dependencies, in which will package your application or your libraries or your microservice. And well, this tool is used to manage the compilation and the tests from one single place in your and easily in your code. So well, with those three tools, we already have everything needed to start. But we are in the 21st century, so we obviously want to have more tools and code like in a modern manner. So we will add a few tools, and we will take rustfmt to format the code, Clippy to lint the code. So linting is about doing some static analysis of the code and try to find bad patterns or bad usage the compiler cannot find for you. We also use Racer or RLS, which are tools used for code completion. So those tools will be used by a plugin in your editor to display some code completions while you type. Kcov can be used for code coverage, LLDB for debugging, and of course, if you want to start coding, you need a good code editor. So, well, there is already many code editors supporting Rust when you add plugins to them. Just to give you a few of them, we have VS Code, which is the one I currently use. There is Atom, IntelliJ, Eclipse, Vim, Emacs. There is also Sublime Text, and many other. So here, well, we already have a good tooling to start. Oh. Oh. Sorry. Okay, so let's start with the basics. So as I said, we will talk about a few set of rules. So first, we'll start with the basic rule about the code base, how to handle dependencies, how to handle the logs, and so on. So first, the code base. This rule says that we should have one single code base managed into your versioning tree. So if you have multiple repositories, it's not an application, it's a distributed system made of multiple applications, and all those applications can follow the 12-factor rules. In that case, well, we have one application made of multiple processes. So we want to keep everything into one single repository so that we can keep consistency between all those processes which we'll have to deploy. So for that, we will use Cargo. Cargo supports workspaces. So a workspace is simply a root folder in which you will create multiple Cargo projects. All those projects will be added to a list in the root file cargo.toml. And from this workspace, you can build and test everything with one single command, like cargo test or cargo build, and you will get all your services built and aggregated back into one single directory into this root folder. So this is easier for packaging everything. Well, okay, so here, if you are working on one single microservice, you can also go into one directory and run those commands inside of it. So you will only build and test this one and do not take care about the others. Okay, the second rule is about dependencies. So it says that we should explicitly declare and isolate dependencies. So how we can do that in Rust? Again with cargo. So there is nothing new. If you do some Node.js, it's the same, or also in Ruby with Gem, you have one file in which you will list all the dependencies you need, and you add the dependencies and the versions you need for this particular project. So here, you declare the dependencies in the file. So you use semantic versioning to specify which dependencies you want to use, which release of the dependencies you want to use. So there is one syntax, for example, here you can say that, okay, give me everything which is 0 dot something, 0.10. So this one will always take the latest, so 0.10.1, 0.10.2, etc. And when we build all this, there is one file which is created, which is called cargo.lock, which will actually lock all the releases of all the dependencies you use. So your dependencies and the dependencies of your dependencies and so on. This file will list everything so that you can reuse it for rebuilding the exact same application or exact same microservice later. So in the case of an application, you have to version this code into your code repository. If you don't, if you build a library, here you can ignore this one, but in the case of an application, you need it. Okay, so let's move now to Rule 3. Rule 3 is about configuration and tells that we should store the configuration into the environment, so more specifically into the environment variables. So why we do that? First, because, well, as I said, the service, once it's running, cannot be modified, and you cannot go in it and modify your configuration files you put in it. So you can still continue to put static internal configuration with your service into a file, because, well, it's static, so it won't move, but anything that can change from one environment to another one should be stored into environment variable. So how can we get back those values in Rust? Well, the standard library has everything you need. So you can read here. You can use this library to get back a variable. So I won't explain how the errors are handled in Rust, but well, just for you to know that there is no such kind of like exception, or there is only return values, and when you call something that can fail, it will return a specific type, which is result. Result is an enum having two possible values, OK and R, like this one here. So you can, if you want, do some kind of pattern matching on this result to extract the value in the case of OK, or to extract the error in the case of an error. You can also say, OK, well, for now, I will just unwrap this error or expect this result. Sorry. So when you do that, it will extract the result from the OK variant, and in the case of an error, the program will panic. If the program panics, it means it will be aborted with backtrace and stopped. So you will see that in the examples I give in other slides, I usually take a shortcut and do this kind of unwrapping. You can also say that, okay, if I have an error, don't panic, but just give me a default value. Okay, so we have the environment variable. Well, if the service is becoming more and more complex, you will have more and more configuration variables in your to be set. So when you are running into your development environment, you will probably like to use .env library. So, well, I often say crate instead of library. Crate is the word for a library in Rust. So I use the .env crate, and with this crate, when I call the initializing function here, this crate will look for a file in the current directory, this .env file, and if it's found, it will load it and read environment variables from it and merge all those variables into the current environment. So you can use it later, like it was injected with an export or from the execution environment. So that way, well, it's a bit easier, and we will use it in a few slides. Last basic rule is about logging. So logging should be treated like an event stream. This means that, well, just display your logs on your standard output and let the execution environment handle it for you. So your application doesn't have to know where to store the logs. Where should they go to a file? Should you do some log rotation? How would you handle archiving of those logs? This is not your job. This is not your application or your service job. Just display that on your standard output, and the execution environment will grab everything for you and process this. Okay, so you can maybe just use some kind of printf or anything like this to display on the output, but you will probably want to be able to separate errors, informations, warning, debug, and traces logs. So there is a crate for that, which is called log. So this one is used by many libraries and many crates in the Rust ecosystem. It's a facade which has a few macros to be called when you want to log things. So those macros are error, warning, info, debug, traces. But this library does not come with any kind of logger of backend. If you want to have something done with those logs, you will have to add another crate to add the logger backend. So let's use this one, env logger, which is a logger configured only with environment variable. So this one can be configured by exporting a specific variable, and you can say, okay, just activate debug or activate warning, activate traces, activate errors, but you can do more with that. You can say, please activate warning, and on this specific Rust module, so the module is the package, in fact, in Rust, the name of the file, or if you create some modules, it's the name of the module. And so on this specific module, please activate debug. So if you use an HTTP library and you want to see something happening in the debug trace for this specific library, you can say, okay, activate on HTTP module, activate debug traces. So you won't get any pollution from any other library using this log system. Okay, so that's it for the basics. Let's move to the processes now. So processes say that we should execute an app as one or more stateless processes. So stateless means that your application cannot rely on the fact that something will be available locally in the instance. So you cannot use a memory for storing data, or you cannot use file system for storing stuff too. You will have to use one database. So let's see how we can integrate our service with a database. First, what is available? Well, we have good support for things like Postgres, SQLite, MySQL. So forget about SQLite. I said we don't use the file system, and this one is using file system. Well, if you don't want to use SQL, you can use NoSQL, and for that there is good support for Redis. There is, well, MongoDB is also quite good. Cassandra, well, it's okay too. And if you want to cache things into an external caching system like Memcached, there is a few libraries too, but they are not very popular yet. So we won't look at the details of those libraries because, well, who wants to use raw SQL today? Those libraries enable classical things we can have in other languages, like preparing statements and executing them with parameters against the database. Instead, we will use an ORM, so an object mapper. And Rust already have a quite good one, which is called Diesel. So Diesel is supporting currently SQLite, Postgres, and MySQL, and already has transactions. With it, you can run database migration and so keep the evolutions of your schema. And well, this one will generate many things for you at compile time, and it has a very good level of documentation. So let's see how we can use it. First, if you want to set it up, you add the dependency. In this dependency, you will add the feature you want to be built. So here we say that we want to use Postgres. This way we avoid building and compiling everything like MySQL and SQLite. Then we can install the Diesel CLI tool, which will be used to set up and run migration. We set up the database. So here we use this .env file to store the database URL. The tool will automatically use it. We set up the database, we run the migration to create, let's say we will call it create users, and we can run this migration once we added data or schema in it. Then you can connect to it and use it. Well, this is not really useful yet because we don't have any data to store in it, so let's create a few set of data. First, we create in the migration file a table with fields. This one will represent a user. We run the command diesel migration run. Then, we create a schema.rs file, or we can call it with another name, and add this macro infer schema and say where to find the URL. So we can give the URL here, or we can give the environment variable to use to fetch the URL. So at compile time, well, the compiler will connect to the database and fetch the schema for you and generate a few code with that. So this code will be, so this is a macro, this is not what is really generated, but this code will contain a DSL enabling you to manipulate those data easily with a few function calls. You will probably want to be able to map some data into the data, some structures into the database too. So we can create a structures name, for example, user. The name is not very important here. So this one is reflecting what we have in the database, and we add a queryable derive statement on top of it. So it's an annotation which says this structure should automatically implement this interface, this trait. And the compiler will call some procedural macros which will get the token tree of this part of the source code. And well, with the description of the structure, it's able to generate automatically a few set of methods to automatically map this structure into database. And we can create other structures to be mapped into the same part of the database if we want. So here we have one structure which is dedicated to insert new data, and this is like queryable, but here this one is insertable. So we can generate a few set of methods to make it possible to map it at insertion time. Well, how can we use it now? Well, we can load data with users.load. We can insert data by saying, okay, Diesel, let's insert some user into users table. We can filter it with by using the DSL. So let's filter some users having the name CodeDive and give me back the first one. And here we can say that this one will be optional. So we won't have any error if we don't find any user. And we can also delete things. So, well, in a real use case, you will probably want to share this connection between threads because, well, you will execute things in parallel. And this connection, so this is the structure PG connection, cannot be shared across thread. And Rust knows it, so, well, it won't be able to compile if you try to share it. So you could wrap it into a mutex and a reference counted pointer if you want, but this won't be very efficient. Instead, let's pull the connections. And there is another good library for that, which is R2D2. So this one is a generic library. It's not specific to Diesel. It's not. It's a generic pooling library, but there is one Diesel specific implementation of it. There is also one for Redis. There is one for Postgres directly if you want to use it. So you can initialize this pool, create a new pool of PG connection manager, and start to use it. So here we have the pool. We can get a new connection from the pool. So depending on the configuration you gave to the pool here, it will try to create a new connection if none is already available, or it will wait until one is available. You can use this connection once you got it, and well, it will automatically return to the pool once it reaches end of the scope, thanks to Rust memory management properties. Okay, so now we have the data, and we will probably want to expose them to other services or to the application users. So let's try to build a REST API. So before exposing those data, we will want to be able to convert them into something like JSON. So we have a good serialization and deserialization library for that, which is called Serde. Serde for serial, deserial. This library is quite nice because there is no runtime reflection on this like you can have in Java, which will get the list of fields, the name of the class, the name of the fields, the types, etc. at runtime, and which cost quite a lot in performance. This one will generate stuff for you at compile time thanks to these two interfaces you will auto-implement during compilation. So by using this macro, derive. And well, Serde is format agnostic. There is no serializer or deserializer implemented. You will have to add one. So let's say we use Serde JSON here, and well, we import this library and we can serialize one of our user into JSON string. Okay, so there are other implementations, other formats supported, like YAML, MessagePack, TOML, Bison, XML, and many more. But they won't be used for our service. So let's see what we have available for the HTTP interface. So first, well, we have Hyper. Hyper is a low-level HTTP library. Well, you can build servers and you can build clients with it. So it has changed a lot recently, because previously it was completely synchronous, and since release 0.11 it has been rewritten to be asynchronous, and the code is completely different now. The problem is that many frameworks have been built around the synchronous library, and they still have not moved to the asynchronous one. So let's talk about those frameworks. So we have, well, the most popular one for now is Iron. Iron is a simple framework. It's you can compose it, you can add many plugins to it, and it's synchronous. So it's built on the synchronous release of Hyper. We have another one we will talk about, which is Rocket. So you can see that this one is a bit less popular, but there are good reasons for that. So it's more recent, it's more powerful, it has a very good documentation, so it has everything to be popular, but it uses compiler plugins, which requires to use the Nightly Rust version. And using the Nightly Rust, well, because compiler plugins use unstable features of the language, only available on the Nightly Rust, and well, things are likely to break between a night and another one. So, well, if you want to build things which run, you should probably use stable things. So let's start with Iron. Iron is very easy to bootstrap. So you add the dependency, then you include the library into your file, and then you can start running your server. You create a new instance of the server. You pass to it a closure which accepts a mutable reference to a request. And in the body of this closure, you do things with the request and return a result around an HTTP response. Then you can start it with HTTP and pass the address and port. So, well, of course, here we should use environment variables to be able to know on which address and which port to listen. Well, this one is easy to extend too. And okay, so here we said hello to the world, but we will probably want to do things that are useful. So let's see how we can add root. First, we add a new dependency, which is router, and we create a few functions which will be used to handle the request. So instead of using closures, here we will be using functions. Those functions have the same signature. They accept one mutable reference to a request, and they return a result with a response. So, well, the first one is not doing many more things than previously, and this one will be used just to list the user. So return a JSON list with all the users in it. The second one will be used to query one single user, and we will use its ID to locate it in the database. This ID will be passed into the HTTP path, and we can fetch it from the request here. So how does it work? Well, we create a new router. On this router, we will add a few set of routes. So the first one, which will be /users, which call this function users, And the second one will be /users/ and then here we give the parameter which is the ID. So when you make an HTTP request to /user/12, for example, well, it will try to find the user with ID 12, and we get back here the ID. So, well, this library, I like it because there is no magic in it. You can quickly understand everything which is done by the library. And, well, in fact, here there is an extension added to the request by the router. So the router, each time it gets a new request to handle, it will add parameters in it if there is some parameters to be added. Okay, so now we have the root, but we still don't have the data in it. So let's add a few. Let's add the database to our handler. So if you remember the pool here, now we can share it across threads. So we will add a new middleware to the chain here, and well, okay. Instead of starting the iron with a router, we will start it with a chain, and this chain will contain the router. When we have that, we can add middlewares to it, so we can link middlewares before processing a request, or after, or around. And this one we build will just insert a new extension into the request, which is the pool. So how we can use it from the handler? We can find the pool by getting the extensions from the request. So this function is a generic function, and the type is the key to find the extension. And then we have the pool. We can use it to query users from the database, serialize them into JSON, and return this to the user, to the client. So here again, there is no magic. So I'm talking about magic because when we come to Rocket, which is the other framework, this one is, well, much more magic. It handles many things for you, like, well, here we create it, we add manage data, we mount a few routes on it, then you create your handlers, you add an annotation on it with the path you want to use and the parameter, you add the signature, and depending on what you add into the signature, it will be able to inject some dependencies when calling it. So here we say that, well, we have one dependency, which is the connection pool. We have a connection pool into the manage list of stuff in Rocket. So when there is a request coming to this route, it will call this function and inject this state in it. Well, unfortunately, this library requires nightly Rust, so we cannot use it in our microservice. Or we can use it, but we will try to avoid using unstable things for now. Okay, let's talk about the clients now. The clients, the HTTP client, there is one popular library for that, which is called Request. Well, Request is very easy to use. As you can see, you can initialize a request to a server and get back the response into JSON. You can the same. You can send delete a request to it. You can post data if you want to it. So let's take a new user here and post it, serialize this one into JSON and send a request. Well, okay. So you have the REST interface. You have the client to talk to that. Well, we have the basics if we want to if you want to start building microservice. Okay, so let's conclude on this. We only scratch the surface of this because, well, microservice is a very complex concept. There is many other patterns to be studied, like if you want to do some event messaging, like with RabbitMQ to exchange data across your different instances. There is service discovery. We haven't talked about service discovery. monitoring. There are other patterns like circuit breaker and so on. Well, we had to start simple with the basis, and now we will be able to start studying what we have more. So, well, Rust has all the basics block if you want to start with microservices. So what I showed to you looks like a web app, but one microservice is with Rust interface is almost like a web app, but a small one. Well, as I said, asynchronous style is still maturing, and if you want to use 100% of your CPU by using asynchronous things, you can. It's available, but well, it's not finished yet. So things will change, improve, obviously. So should we wait? Should we go? No, I'm not sure. And well, so the language is still maturing. The ecosystem is maturing, but well, the community is working hard today, and with stabilization, it will become, Rust will become a serious challenger, I think, in the microservice landscape. So thank you for listening. I will be glad to answer to your questions if you have any.
So, it's time for questions. Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask you if you recommend this Rust and use microservice in early projects, and can you say about performance and maybe stability of this solution that you show us?
Well, I have not used it professionally at Nokia, only on pets project. So, well, if it's a personal project, you can use it. There is no problem using it. If you are ready to, it will be a good way of learning it and try to study what is available and follow actuality and see how things is evolving. Well, for professional things, well, I'm not sure. I will not use it for now, because of those instability and lack in the ecosystem. I would be glad to use it. I would be glad to be able to have time to contribute and improve all those missing things in the ecosystem. But if you don't have time, and if you want to use something which has everything out of the box, well, you should probably go with something like Go or Ruby or Python or Java.
Okay, I want to add, what do you think about Firefox? Then they use official, probably I heard that they use Rust, and
yeah.
What do you think about it?
Well, it's different because, well, Firefox is built by Mozilla, and Rust is also built by Mozilla, and well, the plan with Rust was to create a language so that they can improve Mozilla. So, well, at what time they need to introduce Rust? But well, I was reading an article on this yesterday, and the author was saying that introducing Rust into Mozilla was like changing the engine of an airplane while it was flying. You cannot just remove the engine and put the other one. You have to do things little by little. And this is what they did. They introduced Rust into Firefox like last year, I think it was in 2016. And progressively, after release after release, they added new stuff and so on. But Rust, Mozilla has introduced Servo into, or no, it's not. It's Quantum, which use parts of Servo into it. So Servo is the rendering engine. They have been working on this for many years now, and many things which are available in Rust, in the Rust ecosystem today, has been built for this. So, well, there is a time for everything, and now it's time to introduce Rust into Firefox, and this is what they did.
You told us that the process of deployment is pretty easy because the Rust application is statically built.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? Of course, statical linkage has some benefits, but dynamic has also some. So is there any way to build your application dynamically?
Yes, you can say that you want to build a shared library instead of static library, and you can use also dynamic linking with your dependencies. So I'm not sure you can build. Well, if you use Rust libraries, I'm not sure you can have dynamic no, you can have dynamic library with Rust specific, but you can export your if you build a Rust library, you can export it as a static library, dynamic library, and you can also use dynamic library from the system, like those libraries which have been built in C, for example. But yes, I'm not really sure you can. Well, I will have to check.
Okay, thank you.
If we are talking about Rust and your pets project, could you please describe which typical issues you already faced with and how you solve it?
Well, the first issue is probably this compiler stuff, which is always angry against you, because, well, I come from a managed code world with Java and with Python, and I was more used to having a garbage collector and being able to mess around with all my references. And with Rust, it's not possible, or it's not as easy as in Java, for example. And well, on the first project I was building, I started with one design and started to code. The code was growing, and at some point I faced difficulties in making the compiler happy. And even more, I finally realized that, well, my design will never work with the compiler. It will always be yelling at me, I need to change everything. And it was not just a small refactoring, it was a complete rewrite almost of everything. Like I was building things in a single-threaded manner, and then I said, okay, now I want to add multi-threading. And well, no, it was not working. So I could never compile it. And well, in fact, how I work around this, I did nothing. I just forgot about this project and started a new one. But well, it's just, you have to learn from your failures. And on the next project, well, I try to avoid the bad design I made in the previous one. But well, I had other issue later.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else?
Well, my question regards service discovery. You didn't mention it at the end, but only in passing. Do you know if there is a reliable Zookeeper or etcd client or something like that, so that the service can announce itself and get to know its environment?
So there is. I've been looking at those libraries. There is Consul support. Well, the library is not very used. The documentation exists, but there is almost nothing in it, just the API description. You have also Zookeeper support. Well, it's not very used, but the documentation is much better, and there is etcd too. So I had well, I had a few backup slides in case of the question. So here it is. So this schema is from the Nginx blog. They have better drawers than me. Well, yes, we have Consul, Zookeeper, and etcd. Etcd has the peculiarity that this one is based on asynchronous Rust, so it's using the Tokyo library. Well, I'm not very familiar yet with this asynchronous code, and I must admit that I find it a bit painful to use today, so I hope it will improve a bit later. So my personal view would be to go to Zookeeper, maybe.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions yet? No? Anyone? Okay.